May I pray with you? You know, you and I are about to step into something very significant, very special, that takes place really only 4 times every 100 years or so. And that occasion is when Hanukkah and Christmas align and land on the same day of that year. We have 2 different calendars. The Christians, the church, like most of the world, use what's called the Gregorian calendar, and it was given to us just a few hundred years ago. And the Jewish people use the Hebrew calendar that was given by God to Moses in Exodus chapter 12. And so our calendars are very different, but also centuries ago when the church was persecuted vehemently by the Roman Empire, there was a man named Constantine who stepped in and said, I will stop the afflictions, the persecutions, but Christians must step back from the Jewishness of your faith. The high holy day observances, Shabbat, anything that was Jewish had to be stripped from our own observances as Christians. You know, when I grew up hearing, and even in seminary studies, that from the final book of the Old Testament, Malachi, and the first book of the New Testament, Matthew, that nothing significant really happened. God didn't speak. There were no miracles performed. Nothing remarkable happened. Just keep moving. Nothing could be farther from the truth. About 200 years before Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem, there was yet another tyrant from the Greek Empire. You've known about the Babylonians and the Persians and the Romans, but there was another force, the Hellenistic force of Greeks. And there was a man by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes who invaded and was determined to occupy the soul and the soil of the Jewish people. Listen, he went into the temple, Jerusalem, the holy site of God, and he sacrificed a pig upon the altar and required the Jewish priests to eat the flesh of a pig. Well, yet again, the face and force of the Jewish people rose up and said, enough! And they forced that Greek tyrant and his forces and its face out of Israel. And when they went back into the temple and sought to restore it to its holiness, they discovered that in the menorah there was only enough oil to keep the fire burning for one day. What were they going to do? This was not just any oil. It required that formula that God had prescribed. And it wasn't created there in Jerusalem, but in another place. And so they had to wait for it to come and yet pray that the fire would continue. And do you know the next day, the fire of the candle continued to burn, and yet there was no new oil. And another day, until 8 days later, when the oil arrived, the flame on the candles had been going for 8 days. 8 is the number of new beginnings. Now, I would say to Christians like myself who would say, well, what has that got to do? You need to know. John, the Gospel of John in the Christian scriptures, you know that passage in chapter 10 where Jesus says the thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and have... That passage, John chapter 10, in John chapter 10, we find that Jesus is in the holy temple of Jerusalem observing Hanukkah. That's right. Jesus celebrated the miracle of the fire that would not go out. And of course, for Christians, we think of that Jesus and the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, the miracle that took place, all of that coming together. Could I share with you quickly my own testimony of that hope, the hope of Jesus for Christians and the hope of Hanukkah for the Jewish people, and really for all of us? 35 years ago today, my wife and I stepped away from a little grave of our son and our daughter, who together were born too soon and died too soon. And I leaned into my wife that day, this day, the 23rd of December, 35 years ago, and I said to her, we're not burying anything today. We're planting. We named that little girl Hope. 9 months after that funeral, we launched a ministry called Hope. 6 months after that, we had another little girl named Hope, who recently gave to us our first grandchild, a little girl named Hadassah. Hope. What am I saying? That while there are lights and there are gifts and there are celebrations and families and friends, I'm not naive. I know from my own life, not everyone can sing joy to the world this week. Not everyone wants to see the decorations or hear the songs, or I understand. And we at the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, we're praying for you, that no matter how dark it seems and feels, and the wind that blows out the candle, I am believing and praying that even now you will sense the hand of heaven upon your life to know how very much he loves you. And you may not feel like it, but you are far more than surrounded by the glory of the Lord. I'm believing you are saturated by his promises. We love you, and we're praying for you now.